Hello, and welcome to How Can Your Business Use Blockchain? My name is Lori Bogatis, the moderator for today's webinar. During this 30-minute webinar, John will discuss what blockchain is and explore the potential this technology brings. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. All participants' phones will be placed in mute during the duration of the webinar. All participants will receive a link to the recorded copy of today's webinar, and it will be posted on our website at sikich.com. We would really like to hear from you and would like to include your voice in the conversation. Please feel free to post comments and questions in the Q&A panel on the right side of your GoToWebinar player. To keep our webinar at 30 minutes as promised, we will collect questions and respond to them separately. Your speaker today is John Klebb, partner in charge of strategic technologies. John has been with Sikich for over 20 years. He was instrumental in building our Dynamics Nav ERP practice and starting Directions, the annual Nav convention. At this time, I would like to turn the presentation over to John.
Thank you, Lori, and welcome to our guests. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where on the globe you sit. My name, as Lori said, is John Klebb, and I'm excited to be your tour guide for this next 30 minutes on our blockchain primer. This is cliche, but I wanted to build to an early crescendo with something simple to start us with. These are the 4 industrial revolutions of our history. There have been 3 historic, 1 current. In the 18th century, discovered mechanization, water, steam power. Before the end of the 19th century, electricity sparked mass production in the assembly line. About the time we were landing on the moon, the IT era was in full swing with the advent of the computer chip and Moore's law, which said that the number of electronic components that can be crammed into an integrated circuit was doubling every year. The pace of industrial change really began to accelerate. If I were to put a graph on the screen of the pace of change, it would be a hockey stick, and we're near the bottom edge of where that hockey stick points upwards. Today, we're in the midst of the 4th industrial revolution, the revolution of digital transformation. So when the internet first got its sea legs in the early 90s, we knew it was a special thing. We had no idea what it would bring. The explosion of innovations that have brought us social media, smart mobile devices, big data, the Internet of Things, they were not fully imagined or anticipated. And it has, the Internet itself has so much of an effect on our daily activities and our daily life. I'm of a generation that grew up before the Internet. Our sources of information were newspapers, television, encyclopedias, remember those? And school teachers. And sometimes your neighbors. I get a smile on my face each time I'm sitting at a lunch table with younger staff, and I throw out and I wonder. You know, I wonder when salt was first used in cooking or curing. The conversation may move on, but it never fails that within 2 minutes, and usually less than a minute, one of them comes back with the answer to my useless question. I mean, I was just wondering, I didn't really expect an answer, but with the internet of information, we are clearly able to get that kind of information at the touch of our thumbs on our phones. This is really Internet V1. It's one thing, I'm going to change the concept here a little bit. It's one thing for us to transfer value between each other when we're face to face. I hand you a bill, you hand me back a product, or we exchange coins, whatever the case may be, and face to face. We have trust because we can see each other. We have the ability to believe that we aren't going to be taken advantage of. The uncertainty and the risk is very low. But the internet itself and this internet of information has really done nothing for trust by itself. So what did we do hundreds of years ago when we stopped trading just within our own villages? We put banks, currency, government, laws, corporations, trade organizations in between our transactions. When I'm sending my value to another village in another place, I needed someone to assure me that I was going to receive what I had agreed to from the other end of that transaction. The problem that we face today is that these intermediaries, and we faced it for a long time, provide governments with a central regulatory opportunity. That's good. But they also took away some personal control. And they also add a layer of cost and a level of friction to the speed of our value transfer. When we're face to face, I hand you the money, you hand me the value. But when we have to go through a bank, it may take 3 days to send some money overseas. And these organizations in the middle make it hard for a large portion of the global population to transact business because they lack access to these intermediaries. The statistic I heard recently was 2/3 of the world's population doesn't even have a bank account. And that has aided this income gap that we have in the world, because there are a lot of people who just don't have access to the same benefits that many of us have access to in terms of transacting business and being able to participate in the economy. Blockchain is a digital medium that solves this third-party intermediary problem. Blockchain is a peer-to-peer value exchange. So although we are not facing each other in a room, anything of value, money, titles, deeds, even identity attributes can be exchanged, stored, and managed securely and privately. Trust is not established by powerful central players, but rather by a network consensus, cryptography, and code. Blockchains are turning the internet into a medium of value transfer. Internet V2 is something you'll hear as you listen and as you read the industry and the trades. And Internet of Value is the more common term. Blockchains or distributed ledger technologies are providing that. Blockchains also have the ability to drive greater equality in the world for value transfer and value ownership. They create a secure platform that enables immutable, irrevocable digital identities. They have the ability to provide universal access to financial services and government benefits. They empower people who don't have those bank accounts to be able to transact and do business. They spur a stronger economy and create social stability through greater economic participation. It will help with the income divide. It democratizes the world of business or economic activity. Blockchains are the foundation of the Internet of Value. They eliminate the single point of failure that centralized systems suffer. Regulators can have real-time data on financial flow and asset class risks, providing better oversight of international markets and more productivity. They provide granular provenance tracking, identity management, and concepts of digital security, horizontally and vertically through global supply chains. 3 years ago at the World Economic Forum, 60% of the global business and government leaders that were in attendance expected that fully 10% of the global GDP would be on blockchains by this time. So we have been paying attention for some period of time. And blockchain is likely the most disruptive innovation of this century. I started to talk about the history of industrial revolutions, and I tried to call to mind the infancy of the internet and how we didn't really know what its potential was or its place in our business and personal lives. Many experts today are likening blockchain to that same paradigm. We know it's powerful. We know it's got a lot of potential. We don't even know what it's capable of entirely and what people are going to think of and uses that are going to erupt. However, blockchain's discussed as if it were more mature than it really is. Many hurdles still exist to hinder that widespread adoption. There's technical, regulatory, and governance hurdles. And since blockchains are inherently a network technology, we need widespread collaboration and coordination to be able to pull this all together. So what is blockchain? Well, let me start with another build to the point I want to make. Many of you are familiar with centralized networks. They're common in many businesses. They concentrate data in a single core on your servers, right? With nodes of access on every desk so you can reach the server and pull up the data. They're easy to maintain, and your internal IT folks are happiest in this environment because they have a great deal of control. They can send out patches to your box from their central controlled environment. However, they're easy targets for malicious agents, be it digital or human, because all of the information that those malicious intenders, malicious agents, is concentrated in a single place that they can go after. And you've been obviously know long list of hacks, and we hear about them almost every day, certainly multiple times a week. Decentralized networks are made up of a series of mini centralized networks. They're certainly common in organizations with multiple locations. However, they're still vulnerable because they still have focal points with concentrations of data. A distributed network is one that contains hundreds of thousands of nodes, each equally capable of managing and transferring data. It's this distributed network that is the basis of blockchains. It's also known, another word for a blockchain is a distributed ledger technology, DLT. It's a type of database that's replicated over a peer-to-peer network. Rather than housed in a single centralized database, the information or the state of the information is replicated over thousands of computers, each of which comes to an agreement of the state of the shared database. So you no longer have one place you could target as a malicious agent to be able to hack. You have to hack them all at once at the same microsecond. The components of blockchain include cryptography, a variety of techniques, including one-way hash functions, Merkle trees, public keys. It's also a peer-to-peer network, which means there's no middleman, no governing entity required. Trust is established by the immutability of the data which is replicated across the entire network. There's a consensus mechanism. The agreement between the blockchain network participants about the state of the database is achieved through a consensus mechanism that ensures each participant's view of the shared database matches the view that everyone else has of all the other participants. And the state of that information is replicated in lots and lots and lots of thousands of places. It is a ledger, but ledger often conjures up debits and credits in our mind, and it is certainly that, but it could also be a ledger of data. It could also be a ledger of metadata or attributes of an asset. We'll talk about that in some of the case stories. And since all the participants have an agreed and consistent view of the shared database, any improper alteration of the data will be immediately detected and rejected by all of them. And therein lies the real power of what we're talking about today. So there are two primary types of blockchains, permissionless and permissioned. And my spell checker doesn't think permissionless is a word, so I think I'm going to have to add it. But permissionless blockchains allow anyone to become a validator node, i.e. a node that participates in that consensus we just talked about. These are commonly referred to as miners, and I'm sure most, if not all of you, have heard about miners, Bitcoin miners, and that's what they do. The transaction is submitted, a block, if you will, or a transaction within a block, and the miners go to work to find the immutable hash or Merkle tree or public key that is necessary to give that a unique digital fingerprint. And once that's done, the first miner who finds that gets paid for the transaction, and then all of the nodes are updated to recognize that this is the next block in the chain that now holds the information that is there forever. Public blockchains are usually permissionless because they secure themselves through proof of work and proof of stake that we've been talking about. They're generally slower, and the participants are anonymous or pseudonymous. Bitcoin and Ether are cryptocurrencies, and they're both examples of a public blockchain. Permission blockchains require permission from some governing body to become a miner. Their participants are, therefore, known. Managing a supply chain through a distributed ledger would be an example of a permission blockchain. And I know many of you who've paid attention to blockchains recently or for a long time, you think about, I don't necessarily want the secrets of my business to be out there in the public ether. I want it to be secured. And so maybe a permission blockchain is a perfect answer for the way in which you manage your supply chain. Because you know who those participants are, you want those transactions to be commonly understood. So while Bitcoin commands attention as a digital currency, it's the thing we hear the most about. Several years ago, a 19-year-old named Vitalik Buterin argued that Bitcoin needed a scripting language. He felt he could do a lot more with it if it wasn't just a medium of holding a value. He was unable to convince the powers that be at Bitcoin, so he created a new platform with a couple other guys, and soon thereafter helped form the nonprofit enterprise Ethereum Alliance. While the EEA developed Ether, which is a competing cryptocurrency to Bitcoin, they're also a leading provider of something called smart contracts. A smart contract is a collection of code and data that is deployed to a blockchain. So if you think about a contract, it has tenants, it has elements of the contract that are described, the characteristics of what should happen when an event occurs, what should happen on the other end, how transactions should take place, etc. So with a smart contract in a blockchain, participants can then send data to the smart contract. The contract executes the appropriate method with the user provided data to perform a service, to execute the contract. The code being on the blockchain is immutable and therefore can be used as a trusted third party for the transactions. These are transactions that can be more complex than simply sending funds between accounts. A smart contract can perform calculations, store information, update data, automatically send funds to other accounts. So if you think about an insurance claim, that's a contract, right? They said if these things happen, they will pay you. If these things happen to you, they will pay you on some basis, on some relationship. An insurance company exploring blockchain recently paid a claim to an insured in under 8 seconds. The insured entered the necessary data to trigger the contract, to look at the data and say, it meets our criteria, and here is the amount of money that we pay on this claim. Pretty cool. So let's talk about some benefits that blockchain can bring. Think about the financial industry for a moment. Reconciliation of a transaction is critical to any accounting process. So Bank A engaged in a transaction with Bank B, and each bank records an entry into its respective ledger. At some point in the future, the entries are reconciled to ensure accuracy, that the balance I think you owe me is the same balance that you think you owe me. The need for reconciliation extends well beyond finance, of course. It could be to any data set or record that is maintained by more than one party. Blockchain technology addresses data reconciliation by requiring all the participants to share the same ledger, the same data points. Instead of banks A and B maintaining separate entries for the single transaction, they would share a single transaction maintained on a shared ledger. This eliminates the need for reconciliation. What will this do for auditors? The permanent and persistent storage of transactions on blockchains is particularly useful for trusted governance, evidentiary, or audit purposes. Think about forensic analysis and legal discovery. There's no need for special methods, expensive technologies, or significant resource deployment. The results in reduced litigation costs alone would be of great benefit, but would also create positive externalities such as improved behaviors like honesty, encouraged by transparency and immutability of the ledger. Talk about, maybe I shouldn't bring up a political term, but talk about fake news versus real news. If this is immutable, there is only one truth. The data has integrity. Regulators would have access to these high integrity records of transactions in real or near real time, which would open pathways to productivity gains and risk management. Distributed ledger technology is transparent in that all the transactions are traceable and permanently stored on the network by the network of participants. While a private DLT may add restrictions on who can write or read transactions, it still provides the feature of stakeholders having common access to their set of common transactions. Immutability, data integrity. Another set of benefits. The fact that blockchains are distributed and not housed in that single centralized database means that in the event of the failure of any one node, everyone else has a copy of the correct information. Any one node down does not affect the ledger. This is like the internet overall, right? There's lots of nodes on the internet, and when you transfer something from one place to another through the cloud, if one of those nodes is down, it just finds another route. It still gets to your destination. The resilience and security provides the opportunity to create new identity systems where users own their own data, and that data remains universally consistent and cannot be destroyed. So if you do pretty much anything on the internet, some marketing group somewhere has your data. They know more about you than you know. They know what you bought a year ago. You don't even know what you bought a year ago. They know what you like and dislike. They market that. They make money with that. What if you could bring all that data into your own little black box, into a blockchain with your own private fingerprint that only you can access, but you could share that data if you want. Amazon doesn't need to know, they don't even need to know who you are. They just need to know your shipping address and your payment method and be assured that they get their funds. There was a woman I read about the other day who has a little black box of her data, and a health research company came to her and said, we'd like to include you in our health research. And she said, sure, what data do you need? And she released only that data to them. And then she went on to say, you'll need to pay me for my data, because that's what this data has value, but you only need to pay me if it has value to your research. Interesting. Despite the billions of dollars raised by banks, regulators, tech giants, and startups all over the world to explore the promise of the blockchain, Bitcoin still stands as the only successful scalable implementation of the technology. They've been at it for 8 years, so they've been doing a lot of testing and understanding for all the rest of us, which is great. There's an energy consumption and processing power problem in the Bitcoin and the blockchain world. So we talked about that consensus. We talked about the miners, and there are thousands of miners, for example, on a Bitcoin in the Bitcoin environment, who are all using energy to find the answer, find the right hash that causes the block to become the secure and immutable block. Only one of them wins, so the other 999,000 wasted energy trying to get there. Bitcoin miners currently consume about 0.05% of the world energy. And I know personally, because I tried to buy a graphic card the other day, they're consuming all the graphic cards that anybody's making, because it turns out graphic processing units are the best and fastest way to win this race. The power they consume could power 1 million households in the US. This is holding us back. Since distributed ledgers are designed to retain all the previous transactions, the ledger's size continues to bloat, grow and grow and grow. This bloat will need to be forecast against both the capabilities of the network and the ability for users to use the ledger in a cost-effective way. So it's one thing if you have a private blockchain and you want your supply chain to work in it, your bloat is not going to be as serious as the bloat in a Bitcoin, especially when Bitcoin goes crazy in value. In the Bitcoin ledger bloat, because of the transactions, everyone has to be kept from the beginning of time. Blockchains are designed for decentralized control, and that's on purpose. That's their power, not decentralized semantics, though. They possess no mechanism for extending their data model in a self-discoverable or machine-readable way. This makes turning the existing blockchain designs to meet new use cases challenging and expensive. Big tech companies are building engines which we can use to deploy these. They're coming out with blockchain as a service, which is great. I saw yesterday KPMG offers a blockchain as a service through Microsoft's product on Azure. So that will help. As I said earlier, blockchains depend on wide adoption. You know, if it's like Bitcoin, I can't pay you in Bitcoin if you don't have a Bitcoin account. Think of the early days of EDI or RFID technology. When only 3 organizations had deployed the technology, its use is in question. To exchange value and information with a blockchain, existing legacy IT systems will need to adapt. They'll need to be able to reach in. I know some of the products that we represent actually have blockchain capability today, so they can read the blockchain ledger, bring that information, and present it to you as they should. It's unclear in the short and medium term whether businesses will be prepared to overhaul their existing operations to be able to tap into blockchains. And then the one that I guess personally bothers me the most is if illegal, personal or classified or otherwise objectionable data is entered into a public blockchain ledger, it's there forever. This means that situations may arise where information is recorded inappropriately or illegally, and it cannot be removed. The persistence of this information could potentially impact privacy of individuals. So we have to think about that. Let's end our last 4 minutes with some real-world examples to set your mind to thinking. Estonia. I don't know how many of you generally think of Estonia, but the government of Estonia has used blockchain technology to launch an e-residency program for anyone, anywhere in the world. You too can become a resident, an e-resident of Estonia today. Virtual residents receive a digital ID, so you have your own fingerprint with a cryptographic key that allows them to open a business, digitally sign documents, and declare and pay taxes online under Estonian regulations. So if you've been hankering to get into the EU market, there you go. Your path is through Estonia. In Honduras a few years ago, some of you may have remember from the news, the government stealing people's farms because they'd look at your farm and say, hey, those are nice tomatoes. I know you think this is your farm, but I have a government computer over here that says the government owns your farm. Well, in Ghana, 90% of the agricultural lands are undocumented, and therefore they're not even registered with the Land Commission, which definitely lends itself to a chief or an evil warlord or a government agency to come along and say, this is my land now. Fernando de Soto, the great Latin American economist, says this is the #1 issue in the world in terms of economic mobility and prosperity. More important than having those bank accounts we talked about. Because if you don't have a valid title to your land, you can't borrow against it, you can't plan for the future, you can't do anything for sure. Blockchain can provide an immutable record of this ownership, and there's a company named Block Nation doing just that in Ghana. Once the record exists, you can't hack it. This farmer owns that land. Ghana's hoping to attract more foreign investments by locking down property ownership with blockchain. Walmart and Hyperledger and IBM got together to manage a supply chain from source to sale. So I know this is a picture of mangoes, but the one that I have in my knowledge of what Walmart did is they had a problem with packaged crab meat that they were selling, and there was people got sick, and they had to trace back to where the crab came from all the way through the chain, and it took them 3 weeks to be able to get back to the crabber who actually had caught and landed that crab. So they were unsatisfied with that. They put a team of people to work, and 3 months later they came out with a blockchain that crabber begins. And the characteristics of that crab, the movement of that crab, the conditions that crab is moved in, go all the way through from the bringing it ashore to sale, and now they can do it in 3 hours. They can track back to see where that came from. I see I'm running out of time, but I'm going to touch on at least one more case story, and that's the Australian Securities Exchange. They announced in December that they've become the first major bourse to use blockchain to record shareholdings and manage the clearing and settlement of equity transactions. So those of you who play in this space, the old T+2, trade date plus 2 business days settlement is now near real time at the ASX. Only one more case. I'll take another moment of your time. I apologize. But artists have a problem with collecting the values appropriate for their IP. You'll remember Napster. Imogene Heap has solved that problem Grammy Award winning. She puts her songs on a blockchain. She uses a smart contract. And if you want to listen to it, it could be free or maybe microcents. If you want to put that song in your movie, different story, different price, smart contract handles it. And if all you want is a ringtone, you may pay a little bit, but it's all handled and the transaction is consummated in blockchain. The song becomes a business in itself and it has its own bank account. This is truly peer-to-peer and would help anyone who creates intellectual property. This is all we have time for today. I'm pretty excited about this. I hope you're excited as well. Thank you very much for the time and attention you dedicated to this.
Thank you, John. That was very interesting. I definitely learned a thing or two. That concludes today's presentation. Please look for our follow-up email that will alert you to the on-demand status of today's event so that you can review any material or simply go over it again. On behalf of John and the Sikich team, thank you for joining us today and taking the time to view our presentation. We want you to have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.